Yeah.
Okay, now it says it's going live. Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. I am Jasmine Katatikarn, co-founder of the Academy of Animated Art, and with me today is Vadim Turchin, VFX Supervisor and Creative Director at the Mill, and also our most recent teacher that is about to launch his VFX lighting class called Introduction to Photorealistic Lighting. And I'm so excited to have him here because he's also a good friend, so I just get to chat with my friend, but also to introduce you to Vadim, get to know him, and learn more about his class that he's about to offer. So, without further ado, Vadim, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, guys. So my name is Vadim Turchin. I'm currently VFX Supervisor and the Creative Director at the Mill, which is
Excited to have him here because he's also a good. Disregard that
we're
part.
guys. We're figuring this out. So I'm currently Creative Director and VFX Supervisor at the Mill, concentrating primarily on long form and TV projects. Prior to that, I was the head of the CG department at MPC. As many of you might know, MPC and Mill sort of merged together, so we transitioned. Now I'm at the Mill. I've been doing this for almost 25 years, I would say. And I started as a character animator, slowly transitioned into more kind of generalist role. And, my passion is primarily in lighting, general filmmaking, just anything related to cinematography. And, I spend a lot of time on set. So a lot of what I teach comes from my experience with sort of practical photography and cinematography that that I spent a lot of time with. So that's generally the background. I do a lot of mentoring and tutoring, be it at the Mill or an outside world, as we call it. And I had a pleasure of teaching Introduction to Photorealism before with Jasmine, but I think I made some readjustments to the class because I wanted to explore some new ideas. And, as my thinking has changed a little bit, I wanted it to be sort of a special class that um, something that needed to evolve. So that's why some of you might notice that this class was taught a few years ago. It is not the same class in a lot of ways. It has a lot of similarities, but I am trying to enhance it with some new ideas and more modern ways of thinking about photoreal lighting.
Yeah. Yeah, for those who don't know, Vadim did teach a class way early on when we were known as TDU, and we are really excited to have him come back and teach an even better class. And one question I want to start with before we go into the class specifically in more detail is I always like to ask this question to people as a kind of icebreaker, but and then I feel like we get a little insight on the person is if you could have one superpower, what would it be and why?
I thought about that because I knew that question was coming. And I think to me, one superpower would be and I don't mean to scare anybody, but I think reading people's minds.
Ooh.
Partly because so often you work with so many different directors who have an idea or they're asking you to create something. And I feel like what's in their heads is oftentimes not the true description of what they actually state in our discussions. And I always feel like if I could only read their mind and hear the things that they're not saying out loud, I might be able to get a better understanding of how I can arrive to a particular goal or how I can get to a particular place where, they're trying to tell their story and how I can complement it. So that's what would be my um, idea for the superpower.
Interesting. I like that. Although I would want to switch to turn that off because that,
Well, I assume it is voluntary.
yeah. Very nice. Um, I see questions coming up, and feel free to populate the chat with questions, and then I'm going to go through it at the end. So, going on, I'm curious, I always like to hear about people's journey to how they got to where they are. I feel like we learn about a lot about someone that way as well. So, can you tell us a little bit about how did you get into VFX? You always think you're going to be here. What Tell us a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. I actually, I studied chemistry and philosophy when I was in college. So even though when I was growing up, I did a lot of art and drawing and painting. I grew up in Eastern Europe, and my family sort of encouraged a little bit of that artistic um, expression. So I was actually on my way to go to medical school until Jurassic Park came out, and I was so blown away by what is possible. And I said to myself, this is what I need to do. So I essentially abandoned medicine and went to Vancouver Film School and got a degree in character animation because I really wanted to be a character animator. Unfortunately, part of the circumstances, I had to stay in Boston, where I lived for a very long time and where I was, studying medicine. And essentially, I ended up doing medical animation for 3 years. It sort of tied me in between my previous experience and the new experience. After 3 years, I realized that I really needed to um, expand my opportunities, and the only way I could think of is to move to Los Angeles and New York, and I've chosen New York. And ironically, when I moved to New York, the first company I ever worked for was Mill, and then 20 years, a little bit more down the road, I'm back at the Mill. So it's a little bit of a full circle for me. But I had a chance to work at lots of great companies. Jasmine and I, we used to work together at this amazing company called Rhino FX, which produced really beautiful photorealistic work. I worked at PsyOp. I worked at Curious Pictures. I worked at I freelanced at a lot of other places I can't think of, but MPC and the Mill are the most recent places. And it's been a slow transition. I started as a character animator, but I slowly transitioned into more technical, more lighting-driven work, be it primarily because my interest in cinematography has become. One second, guys. My dog just opened the door.
You can tell we're live.
Yeah. We'll edit that out later. But essentially, and then, I went through the same struggles that everyone else is. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but I slowly started to narrow my focus and concentrate more on lighting, cinematography, a little bit of dynamics and physical simulations, and rendering, and kind of stayed with it and slowly became a CG supervisor. I started spending a lot of times going to set because my interest in photography is also very strong, and I wanted to find sort of an outlet. And at that point, I realized that down the road, I wanted to become a VFX supervisor, which to me is sort of this beautiful combination of practical and CG work, kind of bringing that all together. And so that's where my love for storytelling and cinematography, it's all kind of a mixture of experiences that took me there. I mean, I've done a lot of commercials and I've done a lot of sort of film and TV, but I do gravitate nowadays mostly to kind of long form storytelling because I can relate to it a little bit better, and I find myself better suited for those kind of long form projects, which involved a lot of kind of invisible effects work and photorealistic work that I really love. Even though I've done a lot of design stuff, and Jasmine and I were both have done a lot of it, so I've done a lot of non-photoreal work that still shaped a lot of the ways that I think about lighting and approaching lighting. So that's a very compressed story of how I got where I am. But it took a lot of failures. Let me tell you, it wasn't all successes. But yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think we can all relate how most of our paths, wherever we are today, are never quite a straight line and as clear as we.
Absolutely not.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, it's even better that way. I think a younger self would have been like, oh no, it's not this perfect path. But I think it's these, like, you know, unknowns, and like looking back and seeing where we are now, it's like, wow, I could never have guessed that, and I could never have planned it um, even better usually.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I love that. I'd like to like talk to you about teaching specifically. um, I don't know
Yeah.
if you, yeah, if you remember. So as Vadim mentioned, Vadim and I worked together quite a while ago,
So it's
starting
quite
at
a while
Rhino
ago.
Effects, and even then, I remember Vadim was a teacher. Like, I don't know if you remember Vadim, but you were like teaching me, or just whenever you speak to someone, there's there's this thought process of like you're helping others develop themselves, and you're teaching, and it just comes so naturally to you that it only makes sense to me when we were talking about creating a class of like, of
Yeah.
course Vadim would be like the best teacher, because just every day you're an excellent teacher. So I'd like to ask you, like, talk to me a little bit about, your passion for teaching and this VFX class that you're about to launch in July.
I I think just in terms of teaching, it's a way for me to give back a little bit. Yes, absolutely. People pay for all of these classes, and I also do a ton of sort of mentoring where there is no payment. And I find part of the reason I do all of that work is because when I was starting out, there were some very important people in my career who shared their time and knowledge to help me to get better without them getting anything back in return. I mean, the only thing that I have given them back over the years is my loyalty and friendship. That's sort of the thing. But I always found that there's two reasons why teaching is so important to me. One is it's actually an opportunity to stretch yourself and to make sure that some of the beliefs you're holding are actually true beliefs, because it does help to tell them to other people and see what their reaction is, and also tests you in a lot of way to understand that you're on the right pathway to learning something. And the second thing, it is a little bit of giving back, because I do like seeing people who are excited about learning. It is a wonderful field. It's not the easiest profession to be in, but it is a sort of a very rewarding um, pathway to making a living. And I want to encourage people and share some of the things that I wish people told me in the beginning of my career. So it's this giving back and is very important. Plus, I like teaching. I grew up in a family of teachers. Like both of my parents are teachers. My mom was a professor of German and English, and my father taught engineering. So I sort of come from a family of teachers. So maybe that rubbed off a little bit. I don't know, but that's sort of generally. And in terms of the class itself, in teaching this class, I tried to take a very sort of philosophical approach. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's a very practical, very hands-on um, component to this class, and 80% of it is going to be that. But I also want to create kind of a well-rounding thinking artist, which is something that when I see people struggle and we see people hire junior artists and bringing them on into a company like me on NPCs, what I see them struggling is having like a more broader understanding of what the photoreal lighting is and what photorealism is, and helping teaching that and kind of instilling a way of thinking about the world in that particular way. I think that's what I want to get across in the class. So it's not necessarily about software, because that changes so quickly. And I'm able to, and Jasmine as well, we know most of the render engines and we pick them up pretty quickly. But what's important is the general philosophy of approach to lighting. And I'm hoping the introduction, even though it's the introduction course, um, I'm hoping that people in general have a sort of a core understanding of certain lighting ideas, and we're concentrating on more cinematographic aspects of photorealism. Um, it's sort of it's this philosophy of what does the frame give us? Like, what's the tonality that we're trying to hit? How does it fit into the whole story? And through simple examples, the idea would be is that we try to arrive and solve these visual problems. So there will be some technical things for sure, and I will share some of the shortcuts and workflows that I feel efficient lighters should be taking advantage of, and things to think about in troubleshooting. but it is really just the process of thinking and shaping that time and time again after each exercise, thinking about the way we approach integration of the element into a physical plate. And that's the photorealism we'll be talking about. I'm not talking about product lighting, which can be extracted from these ideas, but I really want to concentrate on the story driven, story being the image that we're trying to integrate certain elements into. So that's sort of that gives you kind of the general philosophy and the idea of what this lighting class is about. And it's sort of really forcing you guys to think about lighting in the more broader way, because the lighter is not simply lighter, it's a gatekeeper of all of the information that comes down the pipeline. It's being able to gauge the materials that you guys are getting and making sure they're suitable for lighting work that you're trying to do, or shading work that you're trying to do. So it's a lot of thought that goes into being a successful lighter. I think that not is always taught. We will of course talk about things. Here's the area lights, so they represent physical lights, but the class is a little bit more about just setting you guys up for being successful thinkers and problem solvers rather than just sort of mechanical execution of lighting setups.
Yeah, I really love that. I mean, the philosophy behind the Academy of Animated Art since we first started was always, we're here to teach you to be the best artist possible, not to be the best button pusher possible, right?
Yeah.
And the whole philosophy, and Vadim and I really agree on this, is to focus on you, the foundation of
Yeah.
what you're looking for. And that way it gives you a superpower to, you know, take your skill to any studio, to any software, to any new renderer, because softwares and renderers and studios change all the time. But what doesn't is going to be your foundation and how you see things. So that's why I'm really excited for this class, because it totally aligns with the way that we like to teach our lighting for animation program. And now we have this for VFX. So I think it's super exciting. And I couldn't agree more for, you know, the reason why you love to teach as well, to kind of give back. And also, I think also, I wish I had known as a younger self that there's these creative avenues that we can have great careers in too. It's funny, I forgot you were in medical animation, because so was I for a certain period. But I think it's great how it all aligns. Can you speak a little bit to, like, who is this VFX class for? Like, who?
I think
Yeah.
it's a good question. I think it's for anyone who really wants to become a better lighter. I think there's a foundation to lighting which is beautifully laid out in the rest of the classes. And in this one, I wanted to concentrate more on kind of physical lighting and bringing anyone who is interested in kind of sort of photorealistic, working for companies like ILM or Animalogic, Double Negative, Mill, anywhere where photorealism is important. Again, we're not going to be doing product lighting. But I'm hoping that a lot of the ideas that we sort of, and part of the reason I'm not including product lighting, because I consider it to be a hyper realistic work, not necessarily photorealistic, because most of the time it's about very specific shaping of the object. What I'm talking about is story driven images. So can I share my screen quickly?
Yeah, of course.
Yep. Just so you guys get a little bit of a sense of, can you see my screen?
Yes.
So these are essentially the plates that we'll be working with throughout the course. Not all of them, but actually a lot of them will be available for extra practice. But the idea is taking each one of these images and understanding the tonal quality, understanding the importance of choosing the light sources, understanding of what is the visual story being told, and how do we integrate an object into the scene that it becomes invisible, that it sort of melts into this world. So it's not about things standing out, it's about things kind of engaging and belonging within the context of the shots. So these are all seem to be simple scenarios, but I assure you they're not as straightforward as they seem. And a lot of things that we'll talk about is also I want to avoid certain shortcomings that I see in a lot of lighters making when they kind of start doing photorealistic lighting, which is we're going to talk a lot about how do we use HDRI images, because I know everyone thinks it's a solve all um, type of tool, but I actually want to discourage people in a way, or encourage people to be very careful when they're utilizing um, those type of images. So it's really about the philosophy, analyzing what the image gives us, thinking about what the light sources are, and thinking about how do we embed something within the context of the scene, but also thinking about what happens when we introduce an object within this content. How does that kind of disturb the tonal quality, the visual fabric of the shot? Because that is just as important. So it's not just about object being influenced by the scene, it's about the object influencing the scene itself. It's about integrating it and melting within context. And we'll talk about photorealism a lot broader as well, because yes, we're talking about lighting, but photorealism is a layering of lots of optical elements and all sorts of things. And that's something we're going to discuss as well. So I don't know if I'm answering the question who the class is for. I think the class is for those who are eager to broaden their understanding of lighting. I think that's sort of these are practical exercises where learning the analysis of the image we're working with and appreciating what it gives us, and taking things that appear to be simple and understanding that to actually integrate something with the context of the scene takes a little bit of processing and utilizing very specific artistic skills.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I mean, it seems the art of VFX and photorealistic lighting is not seeing it, right? It's kind of this
It's not
yeah.
seeing it, and we'll talk about silly things that everyone is familiar to. Everyone puts in their demo reels chrome
Mm-hmm.
spheres and gray spheres, but they have very particular purpose for photorealistic lighting. And we'll have some scenes that will have perfect case studies, meaning every possible reference, every possible lighting reference, every possible physical reference of the space will be provided. But I'm purposefully including some of the plates where nothing is given to you except the plate itself.
Mm.
And we'll have to sort of think really hard about what is the image giving us, and but more importantly, what is it that we're not seeing in the plate but being suggested, and how do we introduce it as an element of lighting? So there's a little bit of that challenge. So we'll be fluctuating between kind of a broader toolkit and then a smaller toolkit, so you can hopefully learn to solve different types of lighting problems.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, that's where the problem solver and like teaching someone to, and that's the biggest skill when you're in production, right? The
Yeah.
best artists are the ones that can problem solve and use their creative thinking on their feet and act fast and pivot and iterate. So I think that's great, and that's something that's often not taught or even talked about. Yeah, so I mean, I wish I can go back and take this class when I was
And one
starting.
thing I'll mention,
Yeah.
Jess, is that even though this is called Introduction
Mm-hmm.
to Photorealistic Lighting, there are quite a few very advanced concepts. So it's not basic strategies. It's essentially us sharing with you guys some of the philosophies that we have accumulated in terms of what lighting is, what are the pitfalls that I see um, young lighters are making, and just the basic analysis. Because the difference between the junior and advanced lighter is really just attention to detail.
Mm-hmm.
The techniques are easily learned, but as you become a better lighter, it's really understanding what the minimum amount of lights the scene requires, when to stop, which is the philosophical question, when is enough of lights in the scene is enough, when do you use HDRIs, thinking about the sizes of light sources and why does that matter. We're going to talk a lot about scale, which is an important concept for many reasons. And it's how do we shape perception with lighting?
Yeah.
That's another big component.
No, it's huge. And I think another thing that you brought into this class, which is a huge um, obstacle for many, are just assets, right? Like plates to use
Yeah,
and models. Because if your focus is to be a lighting artist and VFX, let's say, you don't necessarily need to be, roto like matching plates or creating models, but we kind of, and that's also part of the Academy of Animated Arts philosophy, is like we kind of get rid of all those obstacles for you, so then you're able to just focus on the skill set that you need to get that job, right? If you're a VFX
absolutely.
artist, yeah, you're not going to be asked to do all
Yeah,
of
we
the
also
stuff.
provide, I try to generate scans as of many elements. I try to give you material that is essentially reflective of when we're working in the true um, visual effects pipeline, be it at the mill, MPC, Framestore, whatever high-end facility, ILM, double negative, they all kind of rely on certain aspects of getting things from the set. And I try to give you a range of elements and help you to think about what do you need, what should you expect, and what you potentially need to be prepared to build yourself. You're building your own little live action set essentially in each one of these exercises. We think about it as a live set. We try not to think of it in terms of the CG. We try to think about lights as something that is not just a pure flat color, but it's something that is textured and has complexity. And we try to think of all of those things. And essentially, we try to layer as much realism and hopefully taking the image that is 80% there, which a lot of people get to closer to 100% by thinking about all the little details and pings and textural elements of that light can provide to kind of give life to a particular object. We'll do a little bit of compositing in this class. I want to warn you, this is not a compositing course, but I will encourage you guys to kind of work in Nuke and think about assembling the images, and I will help you as much as I can to kind of work in that pipeline. We're not going to talk about complex, colorful workflows. I'm going to try to avoid doing that. So sort of things like ACEs. I'm going to keep it out of this class, partly because it is a more complex concept, and I think it really will distract us from just purely thinking about the lighting setup. But we'll talk a little bit about shading, and I'll give my thoughts about how do I like to set up a scene. What kind of shaders do I like to put? Because there's different techniques people suggest, but I'll share with you how I like to work. And generally, yeah, every scene, or pretty much every scene, will have a scan of the location. It will have sort of build out. You obviously will have the camera, which will be locked, and then it's a secret I'm not showing you, but we're going to try to integrate some of the objects within this scene and sort of work through. And the idea is invisible photorealism. It's integration of elements, making them feel part of the scenery. And we'll do it to best of our ability because again, photorealism is many different things being put together, which we will discuss, but we'll try to push lighting as much as possible to integrate it within the context of each individual plate. All right?
Yeah, for sure. Sounds good. Um, One question I have is, how would you say this class is different from other VFX classes that people may have seen out there?
I think the class is part of the reason I wanted to put this course together. I think there is very rarely philosophical discussion about what the lighting is. Meaning, I'm not talking about that this is class full of theory. It's not. And to be honest, only the first class is very theoretical. But there is a large component of classes is concentrating too much on the technical aspects of lighting. And very few courses that sort of concentrate on thinking about the image in kind of in a very expressionistic way and analyzing it and understanding what the image presents. And I think reinforcing it in each class, I think is an opportunity for us to become better lighters. It's a thinking process. It's thinking about the context of the story. And again, you will notice that I'm referring to the story, even though we have a single image that we're working with. But most of the time, when you're working on a long form project, there's a story being told, or even a commercial with lots of shots. There's certain consistency that is expected. So how do we approach a scene in a way that is repeatable, that is consistent, that is manageable, and kind of belongs in the context of the shot that we're working with. Be it how do we approach a night shot versus daylight shot. And again, some of this is just my ideas, what I found successful that I shared with people, they found successful, and just the goal is make you guys into thinking artists. Again, a lot of classes can teach you, and there's some terrific courses on the technical aspects of Arnold or Renderman, and they're concentrating on those things. Um, there's lots of good courses. I just feel this one is an opportunity to have kind of a more of a discussion and in shaping of to be consistent in terms of the approach to lighting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the approach of storytelling. I mean, I feel like in any part of animation, whether it's VFX or feature animation, it all comes back to story. And everyone's working together to tell the story. And I like that you emphasize that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's my course, and of course I like it. I
Fair
mean,
enough.
I'll tell you one thing is that I try to put in as much as what I've learned over the, more than 20 years of doing this.
Mm.
But, this is just the first step, guys. I think it's an opportunity to layer the foundation for you guys to become better lighters. This is what I hope will happen. And the way you think about lighting and the way you approach it is, that's what drives my motivation for creating this course.
Yeah.
It's just the beginning. This course is not an end in itself, because there's opportunity to start thinking about what does the moving footage give you? How does that change as this lighting and scenery changes for the movement of the shot? How do we approach that? But the foundation that we'll lay in this course essentially it just gets extended to those more complicated problems.
Yeah.
And I didn't want it to be like a tutorial where it locks you into that specific problem solve. I think it should be something that gives you a tool set and a way of thinking to solve other types of problem, other types of lighting setup without, just getting nervous that, I've seen this particular tutorial and I executed this particular thing.
Mm.
It's just giving you kind of a broader understanding of what the approach is, and hopefully it's approach that you guys find helpful, and some of the techniques and ideas and the way I think about lighting, hopefully you'll find beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely. I know I will, and I guess considered a senior, and I know I'll probably get a lot out of this. I see the questions coming up, so keep on putting in your questions. I have one more question for Vadim, and then we're going to get into the Q&A. The question I have for you is, what is your advice for someone who wants to break into the industry? Let's say they're beginning. What would you advise?
That's a good question. A lot of people ask me that all the time, and there's a few things that I always want to tell people. Number one, you got to be patient, and you got to try as hard as you can. You're probably going to be rejected more than you accepted into this world, and that's okay. That's number one. I think you recognize this, and just remember, those who are passionate and they believe this is what they want to do, they will succeed. I have no doubt. I mean, there are ways and avenues to get into great companies, be it becoming what's called a runner or becoming an intern. It's always take those opportunities. It's better to be an intern in the best company than a paid artist in some kind of mediocre place, because you have to think long term a little bit, especially in the beginning of your career, to get the right foundation, the right jump start. The other thing I would say is just remember, everyone learns at their own pace. There's going to be people in your career, and I've seen this time and time again, whose learning gets accelerated, or they're more talented at that particular period of time, or they seem to grasp information a lot faster, and that is okay. Don't feel like you have to compete with everybody else. moving in the right direction. You choose the pace that works for you, and I assure you, if you're passionate, you slowly get. At least that's how it was for me. I have went to film school with a lot of people who were so intimidating when we were in film school, and I have to tell you, by this point, you know, I passed quite a few of them, and a lot of them stayed at that same level. And we all developed at a different pace. We accelerate, we quickly get to a certain level, we become amazing, or it takes us a little bit of time. We may have a breakthrough at one point of our career, and we realize we kind of reached a good point. Um, and don't be an asshole. That's sort of the biggest advice I would give you. It's a very small industry, and you know, just when you're sharing your opinions or you say things that are negative about the places you have worked, I really want to discourage all of you guys to do that. That's sort of a little bit more of advice that I give. Look, unless you're very close friends, one thing I can say something to Jasmine because I know her for many years, but if you're in the company of coworkers, and just learn to be positive and learn that someone else's experience is not necessarily your experience. Some people might have bad experiences working for certain places, but you might have a completely opposite experience. And the last thing I'll tell you, when you're choosing a job, make sure you're choosing the people you'll be working with. Don't just look at the work that the company produces, but choose the people who will champion you, who will be your mentor and your bosses. Because if there's no connection there, no quality of work will compensate for lack of mentorship or caring from people who you report to. Those are sort of my pillars of what I would recommend people who are trying to break into the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. And especially with the environment, the work environment, again, some things that many people don't talk about. We kind of look at the work, the shiny
Yeah.
object. But if you talk to anyone in the industry, their favorite part are the people and the
Yeah.
people that they work with. And that is what really makes it fulfilling. So I love that you mentioned that. Yeah, and definitely really good advice. Take that advice if you're listening and you're new to the industry. And the patience thing is huge too, right?
Yeah.
Um, Almost no one's an overnight success. And if you listen to
No.
anyone's journey, as we said in the beginning, it's not straightforward. It's not clean cut and all roses and rainbows, but it's the consistency and the patience and the love for it, and just keep on
Yeah.
going.
And don't be afraid to
Yeah.
fail. I mean, that's the other thing I will say. I still experience this all the time. If a job makes you nervous, you should probably do it.
Mhm. Yeah. What's the thing? If you're not failing, then you're
Yeah.
not trying, or you're not pushing yourself, or something. There's a very eloquent phrase that I'm not saying correctly, but it is that. Um, okay. Let's go to some of these questions that we have here. A question here is this course focused on beginners or mid-senior artists who might also find this helpful?
I think it's I think it's both because I again, I assume that you have some sort of foundation of lighting. Like, I don't get it. We're not lighting a sphere and we're talking about, here's the key light, here's the fill light. We talk about those terms in the context of the shot. Okay. So lighting to me, they will use some advanced techniques like projections of plates and taking HDRI, reprojecting it, or extracting key lights or extracting certain aspects of the image. We'll talk about all those techniques, and you know keep in mind that the technique might not seem very advanced, but a lot of things in lighting are very straightforward, and it doesn't have to be technical exercise. Part of the reason I love lighting is because it's an exercise in cinematography. So yes, the concepts, thinking about things will be going from basic to advanced, but the techniques, there's nothing in this course I would say that will, we might talk about some render passes that might be helpful to us. Um, that might be a little bit more advanced, and we'll try to kind of analyze why certain things are useful and but again, we don't want to get too much into compositing of things. The idea I have for this course is that we'll try to light in the scene as much as possible because it's too much to ask of you guys to be great compositors and sort of start to work tightly on integrating these things together. If you have that ability, I think that's wonderful. So yeah, it will be a little bit of a basic concept. I don't feel, let me put it to you this way. If I had a junior artist working for me and I wanted to teach them lighting, I would probably follow through the same footsteps that I'm following here, and I would expect them to work on advanced shots.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Um, another question that we have is, I know it's not software specific, but people are curious. What software renderer would Vadim be mainly working in and recommend for the class? I recently have been making a switch from Maya to Houdini and messing around with various renderers for the first time.
I think I'm a big Houdini user, and so is Jasmine. We both use Houdini and Maya. I'm fluid in rendering about. For this course, I was planning on using Maya and Arnold, but I'm more than happy to export things because we're not dealing with texturing, so there's nothing sort of very specific to a render engine. I also use Redshift a lot for my work at home, but for this particular class, I wanted to keep something that is a little bit more industry standard, which is working in Maya. But I'm happy for those of you guys who are working in Houdini. Again, it's not about the tool set. I'll export things in a format that you can bring in. We'll have everything as an Olympic file, which will allow you to bring it into Houdini, and I'll test it to make sure that works. But that's how we work at the mill, to be honest. We often have lighters who switch between, working in Maya, working in Houdini, and we have a pipeline to kind of spread things around, and you can work whatever format you want. So yeah, it's again, it's less about the tool set. I use Maya because for this type of work, I like to tinker with lighting. It's a little bit more textile to me in Maya, and that's why I do a presentation. Plus, the other thing I will mention is, which is a good question, I'm actually using old render layers in Maya because I'm trying to make this class as generic as possible in terms of the ideas and not to create complexities of certain technologies that any place you go to work will teach you their pipeline tools anyway.
Yep,
So
absolutely.
hopefully that answers the question, but it's going to be Maya, Arnold, and there will be FBX and Olympic exports for cameras and everything else that you are more than welcome to load in Houdini.
Yeah, absolutely. That's for those who are current Academy of Anime Arts students. That's exactly how we run it too. While, our classes we use a tool and we do use Maya for our lighting for animation, but our students are able to use any software, and it translates there. So, and also in our Discord channel, there's help channels for like each of the different softwares too for the technical questions. So yeah, that's amazing, and I completely agree with that way of thinking. Moving on to another question, you're very popular, Vadim.
Mm.
I'm going to condense some of these questions. So a question would be, for someone
I'm
who
listening. My dog keeps on going in and out. Come on.
I'm so offended. No kidding. For someone, I'm sitting at an empty chair. For someone who has
Yeah,
taken
so
perhaps.
people don't think I'm lying.
Oh, look at that! Oh, what's his name? Her, or him?
It's her, Lacey.
Hi, Lacey. Okay, Lacey, maybe you can answer this question for us.
Yeah, Lacey, do you want to answer the question?
Yes, for those who might have taken your older photoreal TDU
Yep.
class or another class someone mentioned, perhaps in CG Society, I'm not sure. Um,
Mhm.
what what are the new topics or techniques that would be covered? Essentially, someone's wondering if they've taken that previous class, should
Mhm.
they take this class?
It's an interesting question. Like my thinking has evolved, and it's been that class. I think was 5 years ago,
More than
right?
that, maybe. Yeah.
More than that. So some of the workflows and some of the ways I think about the lighting, some of the ways I think about building out the scene, the complexity has risen a little bit more. Um, and the way I think about HDRIs have evolved after seeing, what lighters do. It's a difficult question for me. My answer would be yes. I think it's a good opportunity to at least reinforce. It's a different set of back plates as well. So we're working through different types of problems. I'm repeating some of the plates, but I'm offering different options in terms of the assets that we use. And I think it's a good idea to kind of reinforce some of these things. And um, there will definitely be new concepts because I'm going to talk a little bit about optimizing lighting scenes. How do we, we get a scene, how do we sort of think about what our expectation should be? How do we populate it and make it efficient? There's a definitely technical component, guys. Yes, we're talking about philosophy of lighting, but I will always be touching upon efficiency. How do we structure the scene in a way that is efficient as possible? And what our expectations should be as those kind of gatekeepers of all this data being dumped on us to produce the final image. So, yes, I would say I think it might be worth taking a class, if for no other reason than to kind of sharpen the skills a little bit and have new ways of thinking about this now that the time has passed. Um, that's just but I've taken, to be honest, even for me over the years, I've taken the same class several times because I just forget things. So it just helps to refresh and reinforce. I've done it more with kind of technical things, but you know, like I've been learning Unreal a lot, and I keep on forgetting things.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, if you guys want to try lighting in Unreal, you can try that too. Um,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do feel as I get older, I don't think it's old age, but when I'm learning things, I I actually also like to learn it from multiple like different perspectives, like different if even if like one class kind of does something, I like to take another class that's like even exactly similar, and even when I see when I see it for the second time, something else catches my eye. Like you learn something that you didn't even pay attention to the first time. So there's always something beneficial. It's like reading that book that you read, your favorite book, like 20 times, right? You always get something out of
exactly.
it, right?
I
Um,
think that's Jasmine, that's actually an excellent point because I also, as we get more mature in the understanding of lighting, we actually understand certain concepts a lot better. So
mm,
you might perceive something a lot better. And look, I don't pretend to be the world greatest lighter. There's a lot of wonderful teachers who have a different perspective on what the lighting is. And the CG Society classes are excellent. There's a lot of excellent work. I just think we offer kind of just a different perspective. And I think more perspectives you can get, the better lighter you become.
yeah, no,
I'm not telling you guys this is the only way to think about this stuff. What I'm
yeah,
hoping is this is the way that I think about it and has been successful, and I find those are sort of necessary ways of processing information that is beneficial for you to become a successful lighter, and I've seen it work.
yeah,
Um, this is not like some voodoo science. It's the opportunity to talk about this stuff, interact, and answer questions and shape your way of thinking. So I've also taken multiple courses, and I always try to learn from different people. I
mm-hmm.
have other friends who teach, and um, yeah, I mean, hopefully that answers the question. I
Yeah.
don't know.
And I think, I mean, what you keep on saying, and I think this answers like what makes this class so different from maybe other classes that are more technically focused, is that this is like preparing you to be a better thinker. Like it's giving you the skill set to problem solve and to think outside the box when you run into that problems, because you will when you
Yeah,
run into real production. And if you're just following a tutorial, let's say, that's showing you what buttons to click, when something goes wrong, you're just going to kind of be sitting there like, oh, I don't know what to do now. But if the way that you're teaching sounds like that person's going to be able to think for themselves and be like, oh, okay,
yeah, I
I
think
know this. Let me
that's
figure it out.
exactly
Yeah.
that's exactly the way I would like to think about it. And let me just be clear, there will be some very technical things that we talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Like when do we use proxies? Like why would we use proxies? Well, why do we project HDRI? When do we do that? What's the point of HDRI image? why do we have to be careful when we're using it, and when does it work to be used in certain kind of capacity and when doesn't. Like, there are technical components to this class. Like, you will have a set of skills that will be beneficial and make you an efficient problem solver.
Yeah.
But also I like to concentrate also on the creative aspect of all of this, because this is fun. This is not, we're cinematographers, and this is not simply just um, kind of a technical exercise. Look, this is a technical software. We're just trying to dilute it into something a little bit more artistic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I love this industry. It's this combination of creative and technical. And it's quite unique. Another question, and I'll wrap this up into one. I've seen a couple of people asking, what's the length of the class and what's the formatting? Basically, like live classes versus pre-recorded, etc. And I can help answer this too if you.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, what we've been thinking, guys, is that the first two classes would be live classes, because the first class, I just want to have a discussion and kind of being able to answer some of the kind of philosophical questions about what I think photorealism is and what are the things that we think about. And his second class is more about the techniques, because I want to talk about HDRIs, and I also want it to be a live class because I want to demo some things and answer some questions which might feel like they're going over someone's head, but like some of the techniques that I use to keep my workflow efficient, I feel like I want to be able to respond to you guys' questions and keep the length of a class a little bit more flexible. But the rest of the classes, I think, the plan is that I will pre-record them, and the way I want to work through them, I actually um, don't want to cut anything away. I want to give you guys the ability to speed up or skip certain aspects. I'm not going to go frame by frame, kind of isolating every element of lighting a shot, but I will provide the sort of the basic foundation of how do I approach it, because I want to leave some of it for you to problem solve. And the idea is, once you watch that class and kind of get an introduction to that plate and see the type of questions I'm asking, you ask a similar type of questions, kind of make it your own, and then work on the integration of the shots, and then we have a conversation about what's been successful and what has not been successful. So those portions are pre-recorded. Um, but again, last time I did everything pre-recorded. This time I like kind of a live component because I love the feedback and the questions. I think there's something really amazing about being able to respond to you guys and get that personal attention that, because there's a mentoring component to this as well, which I want to take advantage of.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there will be like feedback on student work, correct?
Yep.
Like
Yep.
similar to how perhaps we do it for the Lighting for Animation program, where this kind of goes into the question that was just asked. I just saw it was, how easy will the class be if we have a formal 9 to 6 job on the side? Um, and this is how we did, like, this is the beauty of, an online class and the flexibility and also the pre-recorded, as Vadim said. And even that live class that Vadim mentioned will be recorded, right? So if you can't make it live, you won't miss that content. But the way it works is you have that pre-recorded class, so it's flexible to when you're available, right? So you can watch it when on your time, on your schedule, and then with feedback on your work, you post it when you're ready as well.
Yeah.
So you don't feel like, oh no, I'm missing out. And then depending on how Vadim likes to run it, some of our teachers like to do live feedback sessions, or they do like just pre-recorded feedback. But you will get feedback on your work directly
Last
from
time I've done
Vadim. Yeah.
pre-recorded, and what
Mhm.
I've done, guys, is essentially I took everybody's work in Photoshop and I deconstructed each image, so that way you get to see everybody's work
Mhm.
in one set of feedback. And it's not about pointing out whose work is better, whose work is worse, because remember, it's important to reinforce the idea we all move at our own pace, but it is good to see what decisions people made about approaching a certain problem, and because it becomes a learning process in itself. That's why I like to do it all together.
Yeah.
So you can see where people stumbled or succeeded in that regard. I mean, the class can be live, um, but it limits you guys in a lot of ways because we're all from all over the world. Like I don't know what the distribution of people is, but I live in New York, so I'm on New York time. But um, it's we'll keep it flexible. And look, we all have jobs. Trust me, I have a serious job as well.
Yeah.
So it's I recognize the difficulty of
Mm-hmm.
doing these classes, and that's why um, I'm sympathetic. You get the benefit of trying to do this sort of exercises and trying to solve this lighting problems, and they have different difficulty as well. Sometimes, I get a little bit, it's not a linear progression. I like to kind of throw a few curveballs. That way you guys, try something challenging just like it is in real careers, and then maybe there's a easier exercise, where we go through and you just nailed it and it's sort of, look, it's just ambient lighting and maybe that's all it needs to be, because it also forces you, what I'm trying to do is force you to think, what is the appropriate amount of lighting for something to exist in this shot? Okay, sometimes you don't want to overthink something.
Yes.
Okay?
Absolutely. And I do like I mean, what you described, where you give feedback to everyone all at once so you can see everything. It's essentially dailies, like when
Yep,
we're in
exactly.
production. And that's how you learn so much, too, by seeing what other people are doing, learning from other people's shots as well. So it's like a bonus of learning that people don't even think about.
Yep.
Uh, and yeah, I think it's wonderful. Feedback videos will be uploaded to the AAA YouTube channel. Yes, that was a question. And then another question that just popped up, and we're wrapping it up soon. So throw in any last minute questions you have, and I'll try to fit it in. No promises, but we'll do our best. Another question is, are all the assignments, are they all still in static lighting assignments, or are there any
All of
moving?
in this course, I did not, there's two reasons why I'm using static. They're all static, and I just want to concentrate on the moment because oftentimes moving footage doesn't necessarily mean that the lighting becomes more complicated. It just means that you have more rendering to do. And I think for the future, I am thinking that, most more advanced kind of classes, I'm actually hoping, for opportunity, potentially even discussing with the mill. Maybe I use some of the footage we use for some of the commercials, but that's kind of a long term thinking it a little bit. But for this, I like to use static images because I want you guys to be efficient, generate a frame, concentrate on something that is static. And, when I look at demo reels, to be honest, I don't necessarily think, oh, this lighting is static. Oh, it's not good enough. When something is moving, I don't actually have a perception that that is a better indication of how good of a lighter you are if something is shifting around. So yeah, there's no Michael Bay flying cameras and transformers happening through the shot or complicated animations. But that's something that we might be thinking about in the future.
Yeah.
Um, want to keep you guys efficient and focused. I didn't want to distract with just long renders and waiting for the work to happen.
Yep.
Uh,
I agree with that too. I feel like that's a misconception to a lot of people, that they need these, fully animated powerhouse type pieces of work on their reel. Because I've looked at many reels myself through the years, and yes, a lot of them do have moving animations, but that's not what I'm focusing on. If I see a still image that's beautifully lit, I'm gonna take that person versus the person that has, a moving, some kind of moving something, but it's like okay, right?
yeah.
It's like, yeah, focus on the arc of lighting, and we
When you think
know,
about a
yeah,
photograph or a painting, right? Yes,
exactly. That's a great analogy.
it's not a moving image, but I feel captivated.
Mm-hmm.
The motion comes from the emotional aspect of what we're trying to generate. And yes, we're taking kind of generic plates and integrating things, but in the bigger context, the idea is this is where this idea of expanding what we'll learn. And look, you'll be telling a story and kind of integrating in the moment, and a lot of times camera is not moving in the shot.
Yep.
The character is still, or it's just a moment, and it just feels like it belongs in there. It's a good question, but I would encourage you not to, if you're doing an animation reel, yes, you want movement, obviously, but if you're doing a lighting reel, it's often about just beautiful definition of what you're trying to for the viewer to absorb.
Mm-hmm.
It's really about that.
I agree, and I feel like again, when you're starting out, you think you need this long reel of like all this work, but really you only need a few quality pieces that can be stills, to really demonstrate that you know what you're doing and get you that first job. So,
And the
yeah.
images look sophisticated enough, and the assets look
Mm-hmm.
sophisticated enough that it will be up to you to give them a little kind of an added level of polish.
Yeah.
You can do whatever you want with those plates because none of the assets are textured, and it's on purpose because I don't know what format you're working in, and I don't. This is not a texturing class necessarily, but I do encourage you guys to take those assets and take them to the completion.
Yeah.
And that's something we'll talk about, is how I like to light with materials before I even worry about textures, and how do I think about the color and everything else. And um,
Ooh, that sounds interesting. I'm gonna audit this class. um, okay, with that, let me check the feed. I think we're good. We're getting some thank you to Vadim. Thank you very much, Vadim. And yeah, if you're interested in the class, you can find the link here below. And it starts in July. Any last words, Vadim, before we leave?
no, I wish I could see all of you guys because I don't see anything right now.
I know. Yeah, full disclosure, I'm the only one that gets to see the chat, so Dee's just in his dark side over there. I'm in the light.
Yeah.
Um, but I will share it with you after, Vadim. But thank you so much for being
No, thank you
here and
guys.
sharing more about yourself and the class. And yeah, I look forward to being in your class myself. So, with that,
I don't think you need it, but
eh, hey, I'm always we never stop learning, and as we said, when I take it, I'm gonna learn new things or remember things. I'm like, oh, that's right, and it helps hone in and just makes me a better artist and person all
yeah.
together. So yeah, awesome. Well, thank you again. And if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to email me, Jasmine at academyofanimatedart.com. And again, thank you so much, Vadim.
Thanks, guys.
Okay. See you
Bye.
soon.